Well, hello there, Donk Donkersons and Rick Rickersons. It is Thursday, August 9th, 2018, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome inside our New York City studios. I am the host of your program. My name is Luke Thomas from SiriusXM, as well as, of course, MMAFighting.com. To my left is the El Niño Colombiano, Danny Segura, and on the end is the man in the hat, the one and only Chuck Mindenhall from MMA Fighting, as well as The Ringer. How you doing, gents?
What's up,
Feeling
fella?
good?
Yep.
Ready to rock?
Yep, I'm loose.
Very high energy. Okay, a lot to get to today. Actually, you know what's funny is sometimes we come in here and there's like no fight in the Saturday with the beat is preceding it, and there's not a whole lot to talk about. But today, that's really not the issue. So let's jump into it right away. Last week, so about a week ago, this time more or less, I think it was a Friday, we had our big presser with the UFC just prior to UFC 227, and it was announced, Danny, it is official. Conor McGregor is going to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. Some are calling it the biggest fight in MMA history. Is it?
100%. It has
Why?
to be.
Make the case.
I mean, look, we saw how big the Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor fights were, and those were put together like what? The first one was put together within like 2 weeks. And what Conor needs...
The 202 fight, you mean?
The very first one, the one Nate Diaz took on short notice.
Oh, what was that, 196?
196, yeah. And then obviously the second one, it was well planned, and that did very well as well. But Conor McGregor, for Conor McGregor's star power to be, used at its potential, he needs a counterpart. He needs another personality. Nate Diaz was exactly that, a personality, somebody that brought in a distinct style that contrasted Conor McGregor's. Well, Khabib, he's not exactly Nate Diaz, but he's a personality. He brings his own style. I mean, the thing in Brooklyn just made this whole thing a lot bigger. It's too bad it's happening in Vegas, but regardless, they made this fight a lot bigger, and it has to be the biggest fight. It's finally, it's gonna have a nice build-up, and on top of that, anticipation builds fights. Conor McGregor hasn't been in MMA in a while, so that's definitely gonna help. His return itself is gonna sell.
I mean, it's just basic. Who's the bestseller in the sport? It's Conor McGregor, right? So you look at Nate Diaz. Was he a sell before he got to Conor McGregor? We liked him, but I don't think he was going to transcend the sport in that way. This is what made him transcendent, right? The Eddie Alvarez, which was the third biggest pay-per-view of all time. It was a historic event because of what Conor McGregor was doing. Eddie Alvarez benefited from that. If you look at 4 of the 5 top pay-per-views in UFC history, they involve McGregor. In fact, there's only one that he was not in the top 5 was the Mendez fight, I believe, that he was headlining, I should say. That was only, and that was 825,000 pay-per-views. That was a while ago, too. So you look at all of that, and you just say, he's been gone 2 years. He's got a perfect foil, this guy from Dagestan who's undefeated, who's smashing every minute, never loses rounds, knows how to talk to the media, had the Dolly incident. There was the whole Floyd Mayweather fight that took place, and that generated a million, millions and millions more people were paying attention to this fight. You put all those elements together, and by the time we get to the part where they're actually promoting the fight, where they're showing up on the same stage and they're going against each other in that sense, I have a pretty good feeling it's going to be the biggest fight.
Also, I just want to add this: the whole fights with Nate Diaz, they were really non-title bouts. You know what I'm saying? Now you got a story where you got a guy who got stripped, Conor McGregor, and then you got Khabib, who now holds the belt. So you can promote the fight with the championship.
Yeah, but I don't think you promote it. You promote it as a title fight, but I think what it does is it sells to the audience that Khabib is a credible foil. For sure. Like, I don't know that a title fight is what they want to see. They want to see, hey, is that guy he's fighting legit?
Right.
And that tells you he's legit.
But it ups, whatever the title's worth nowadays. I mean, it has to upgrade the
It adds value. I'm not saying it doesn't add value.
He's ascended to the level now where a lot of the interest is to see him get smashed. Let's face it. That's always going to be part of it. Yes, of course. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who don't like him. But
Reebok is selling shirts that say "Return of the King." Like, there's also this reascendancy.
We will go through 900 narratives before we finally get to the actual fight. But I mean, you know how it's going to be. There's going to be disrespect. This is kind of like the whole Nate Diaz thing that we just witnessed as well, which I'm sure we'll get to. But the bottom line is, man, when these two, I was thinking about this. I was like, in theory, we think, oh, this is the biggest fight. I think it really will seem like the biggest fight, too, when we start to see them interact, when we start to really see the promotion. They said they're not doing a world tour this one. I don't think they really need to do something like that. But whatever they're going to do, you put those two guys in the same spot. I just know Khabib Nurmagomedov has been waiting. He downplays it. He's done a great job of just kind of dismissing Conor McGregor as whatever he is, knowing full well who he is the whole way. So it's going to be a lot of fun when we get to that level, and I think it will take on that gravity.
I think the terms of the conversation need to be ironed out here a little bit when we talk about, is it the biggest fight in MMA history, right? Because what does big mean? Exactly. It's actually a fair thing to wonder. So, for example, some of those Akebono fights back in K1 and the Kakutogi Boom in Japan, these were watched upwards of 50 million people. That's half the Super Bowl audience. That's a lot of donks watching terrible fighting. But when MMA is moving along and you look back, you might look at that as one of the most watched fights, and it actually might be more watched in some capacities. Although at the time that was just Japan and didn't have worldwide distribution. I have worldwide distribution. But let's say for the sake of argument, for some reason, that ends up being more watched, even if it's not true ultimately in the end. I still think that McGregor and Khabib is bigger. It's bigger because we do live in a globalized age, however much tension that might cause, for number one. And number two, inside the sport, it actually is like incredibly impactful and important and relevant. You're talking about the premier weight class at the premier weight class's best time. You're talking about the biggest superstar the sport's ever seen globally. You're talking about maybe one of the better fighters the sport's ever seen in the same time, in the same weight class. I'm not comparing it to Mayweather-Pacquiao because it's not. But one of the values of Mayweather-Pacquiao when it was discussed was, well, you got two guys the best ever in their sport. Now, granted, that sport's been around a lot longer, but existing at the same time in the same weight class, now they get to fight. You get something I'm not saying it's the same, haters, but you get something relatively similar. So for me, I don't know if it'll be the most watched. It might end up being, but for those other reasons, it's the biggest fight in MMA history.
I agree with you 100%. I was just going to say, it's funny, the first Frazier-Ali fight, right? Madison Square Garden. Why was it what it was? It's because as Muhammad Ali was coming back,
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I feel like there's a vibe like that. There's been this pent-up sort of enthusiasm. I think a lot of, you could recognize his star power by the potholes he left essentially in his absence. A lot of these events that we considered events and we thought would be events were not events in a true sense. They were not like transcendent type of features for the UFC. This one is, and I think that's what there's a concentration of that event enthusiasm that goes with the Conor McGregor fight that then spills over. And I feel like that's, all of that from a historic relevance of coming back, and also the fact that he is the spiritual belt holder, if you want to look at it that way, of two different weight classes, just as GSP would be, you know what I mean? So it's like you look at that too, and any way you want to take it. You know how these things are. There's multiple angles you can look at it, but all of them are big. There's not one area you can go where well, this fight kind of is not good on this level. They're good on all levels. The fight is that big.
And on top of that, I mean, this fight's going to offer so much clarity. It's going to, after this fight happens, we're all going to be able to sort of take a deep breath because, I mean, the reason why the lightweight division and the featherweight division has been all jammed up, there's been several reasons, but the main one has been the lack of the title defenses, which is attributed to Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor, I think it was almost a span of 20 pay-per-views where he held the lightweight title without being defended, which is crazy. He captured it at 205 and then got stripped right after 223, which is insane. So, the UFC has tried to bring clarity to the lightweight division, implementing interim belts, matching up Khabib and Tony Ferguson, guys who are legit and who deserve to be in championship fights. But unless Conor McGregor fights for that belt, and whether loses or wins, there's never going to be clarity. Why? Because he was the champion and he never lost. That's the fact. Yeah. So the fact that he's going to step in there and we're finally going to get to see, okay, who's the real deal? Is it Khabib or is it Conor McGregor? We're going to get some clarity, and that should, push along the lightweight division, and the train will get back.
We're also in the wheelhouse of his audacity to take this fight, right? I think a lot of people were like, well, he doesn't want anything to do with Khabib Nurmagomedov. He's going to duck him, essentially, which was never really his tendency. I mean, obviously, he was fighting guys. Chad Mendes, people would have said he would never fight that guy because he's a wrestler. Well, he did that. On short notice. On short notice, obviously, you want to put the asterisk onto that because it was short notice. However you want to skew it. The bottom line is, man, why do people love him? It's because of this exact thing. Finally they get around to making this fight, and that's who he comes back against. I mean, that's a tall order. I always remember Dana White saying, nobody wants to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, And that's a good point. I think a lot of guys don't want to, but now that he has the belt, people will fight him. They probably don't want to. I feel like I get the sense that Conor McGregor actually wants to fight him. And I feel like that's what distinguishes him, in these situations.
McGregor has achieved such heights because he ignores the confines of impossibility. Now, sometimes that's gotten him into trouble. Yeah, sure, I'll fight Nate Diaz at UFC 196 on short notice. Yeah. Well, it didn't go so well. Sure, I'll fight Mayweather in a boxing match. Okay, not the best idea. But all the other times he gambled on himself and all the other times he said this was going to go well, they all came up McGregor. So this is really, I think, to your point, we're still in that kind of space. People, they're still, we were all saying, like, when he comes back, will people still care? Yeah, they will. But just one more point about this. I thought one of the other biggest fights I'd ever seen in MMA history was Fedor versus Cro Cop. And if you lived through that MMA at the time that fight was happening, man, it was really, really big. But even now, we just live in a world where, remember the disputes they were having over pay-per-view? Well, which one sold more, Mayweather-Pacquiao or Mayweather-McGregor? And the answer was, well, globally, maybe more through online distribution platforms, but maybe in North America, Mayweather-Pacquiao. But it just speaks to this changing world in which you consume sports, in which you can get. McGregor is a superstar in a way that neither Fedor nor Cro Cop could have been in 2004 and 2005. It just wasn't possible to anybody.
Those guys were not going to end up with a feature in the New Yorker. Those guys were never going to end up in those situations. You know what I'm trying to say? Like,
and they were,
I feel like
that was a huge, huge fight.
With MMA as a sport, they were lifting it up for everybody who had any kind of enthusiasm, maybe even for a broader periphery that wanted to tune in for it. But when you get to a guy like McGregor, everybody tunes in. Everybody tunes in. Everybody knows about it. He's the one guy right now in the sport that everybody is going to be able to discuss. People, the people who pay no attention to the sport will know who Conor McGregor is going into this fight. And I feel like that's the big difference. You know what I mean?
McGregor is a pop culture icon. I mean, he's going to be like Muhammad Ali like 30 years from now. He's part of pop culture. You mention anybody that's in tune with culture, they know who Conor McGregor is. Perhaps you can't say the same thing with Cro Cop or Fedor. But if you look at just his Instagram, everyone follows him. I remember when Nate Diaz, the second time they fought, Lil Wayne was tweeting about it. Like Justin Bieber was tweeting about it. Like, this is a big cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
The fight is going to be October 6th in Las Vegas. We talked about that last week. I don't want to get into it, although everyone's going to be laughing. Oh, you got to go to Vegas to cover McGregor fight? Oh, woe is you. But, I have my issues. Anyway, neither here nor there. The fact that they're not doing a world tour, very quickly, you touched on that, Chuck, so I'll go back to you on this one. You don't think it's a big deal. Why isn't it a big deal?
Only because it's been basically, in his absence, has been kind of a sustained world tour in a weird way. I know they're not specifically doing this, but the publicity they're obviously using that Dolly incident for part of this. And, we've seen Khabib Nurmagomedov more in the spotlight, I think, of late than we've seen him in a long time. I just feel like those two guys are already there. Not so, you could always reach it to more of a fever pitch. I just don't think you have to go that specific route. I don't know exactly what they have in mind, but I have a feeling there's, whatever context they put them in to kind of build this fight will be more than adequate, just given all the things we just mentioned. I just think the fight is too big.
I just think you need one presser, because that's what they did for
for sure.
You need one presser where you have them face off. All the media from around the country shows up. You get all those Getty assets, those USA Today assets, all the video assets. Plus, you got all the bus footage. That's never going away. 100%. Everybody has what they need at that point. They just want to see a face-off, and then, okay, they're ready to rock. Now, the other component to this story, which is kind of interesting, is about St. Pierre. St. Pierre, I know for the folks in the back, I'm kind of jumping around the queue. I apologize for that, for the lower thirds. But I want to talk about St. Pierre because he was in Australia this week, which was kind of like surprising. I was like, what is he doing in Australia? But okay, neither here nor there. He had said,
was he there?
He was doing, you ever seen those things where like they interview celebrities on stage?
Oh, okay.
It's like, an intimate arena.
Right.
It's like that, apparently. So he says that, boy, he would really like the winner of that fight. Now, here's my thing about this, Chuck. I get it. And I don't know what the UFC is going to do, but a big part of me is like, okay, you know what's up. On the plus side, this will sell probably a gazillion pay-per-views, especially if it's McGregor.
Yeah.
That's the one truth. Here's the other truth. Do y'all really think that if St. Pierre captures the title and fights McGregor, who, by the way, at that point, I would still probably at this point favor St. Pierre to win, although I guess if he beats Nurmagomedov, all bets are off. Yeah. But let's just say he does win. If he wins, y'all know he's not defending it. Y'all know he's going to drop it the very next day. So what should the UFC do? And we had Dustin Poirier on the MMA Hour. He was like, no chance, Lance. What do you think?
In my mind, you don't really need a title fight for that to be big. Especially if it's McGregor against GSP, I don't know why you would actually need to do that. They could make it at a catch weight. They could do whatever they wanted with that fight. It's going to do the same thing. But
I think isn't the idea that I can go and get a third belt,
of course,
at a different weight class?
From his perspective, that's great. I think that would be brilliant. But from the UFC's perspective, I feel like I honestly don't believe that they would ever do that. I just don't think they would. There's a lot to go into that, obviously. One being that he's never cut down. Has he ever? I don't think he's ever cut down to 155 pounds.
No.
Yeah.
So now he's a very disciplined guy. I think that if he says he can do it, I would believe him. But at the same time, we haven't seen him do that. So that would be one thing, you know what I mean? But then I really do believe if you have no intention of staying at 155, and I don't think he does. In fact, I think he's just literally like picking a couple of fights at the end here that he wants, and that's what he is. I don't think he's going to stay. Even if it was 170, maybe he wouldn't even stay there. But I think that that's the big factor, and I don't know if you could do that to that division after all the tumultuous times it's had just to get to this point. I just don't think that the UFC could do that. But they could certainly find justification to make the bout and do it in a different way. But I just don't think that it could be for the belt.
Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if it goes down, just given how they've run their business over the past couple of years. But
Conor, it's always all bets off, basically.
But man, they just have to look at what happened at 185. I mean, the 185 division is still recovering from a bunch of chaos and turmoil, practically just because of not getting the right title fights done, right? The Michael Bisping, Dan Henderson's, then the GSP fight. And they just have to learn from that. And to be honest, like GSP's return, anytime GSP fights is going to do good numbers. You don't need a title. So I hope the UFC doesn't make it because I feel like that'll really, I mean, what do you do with guys like Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson?
Every time a guy just wins a title and just walks or gets stripped, it is so bad for the weight class.
It is.
It's a disaster every time.
It's a disaster, yeah.
And the thing is, if Conor comes back and wins a 2 million pay-per-view buy rate event, recaptures the title, and St. Pierre says, I got next, dude, they might, I think they honestly probably will say, you know what?
What's a bigger fight, Khabib, McGregor, or McGregor after beating Khabib, if that happens? GSP.
The latter, maybe, the latter. You're talking about an all-time epic all-star, right? Truly one of the all-stars. If you had an all MMA team, boy, he's on it.
And you're talking about old school versus
and you're talking about the return of the king, because that's who he would be at that point.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, man.
That's something that people can't really fathom yet. If McGregor goes in there and has any of his crazy performance, like where he just goes in there and does something again, where it just is so, up to the moment than that big, and he beats Nurmagomedov in some spectacular way, it's really hard to fathom how big he'll be at that moment.
Dude, you would be getting into some serious peak Floyd Mayweather Pacquiao territory where he could do 3 million pay-per-view buy rate. I mean, that's kind of the space he would be in. Not that I'm rooting for Nurmagomedov to win, but you do think if he wins, it keeps some order. Mm-hmm. Because if they do make the St. Pierre fight, dude, Dustin. Here's the other part about this: the Dustin Poiriers, the Tony Fergusons. Let's see where Kevin Lee ends up. They're going to be screaming mutiny.
I think if the UFC does decide to go down that road, and I would understand them why, obviously business-wise, at least get somebody that's holding the contender torch to pass it on to St. Pierre. Get him that Tony Ferguson fight. Get him a fight at lightweight, just first of all to make sure that he can make 155, and you don't have the fight falling off and then being a disaster.
That's interesting.
And two, passing the torch contender, because the problem is, the problem is not really St. Pierre fighting for the belt. The problem is St. Pierre fighting for the belt while there's like 3, 4, 5 contenders waiting in line.
Right.
That's the issue. So you got to get St. Pierre a contender torch so he can have, be eligible and, justify that.
I like that because you can't, if St. Pierre wins the belt, you can't make him fight afterwards.
Yeah.
But you can make him fight before it.
Yeah.
I like that. It's not a bad idea.
It's all very unprecedented territory in the sense that you have guys now like St. Pierre who've done just about everything in the sport. What does he have left to prove? Well, he just wants to do things that improve his legacy or whatever. It's just, he can pick and choose. They've got guys like Conor McGregor. He's going to go the traditional route in this fight, but afterwards, who knows what he wants to do next? You know what I mean? But again, he's at a level that we've just never seen people ascend to in this sport. So again, he kind of picks and chooses. It's just, normally speaking, you can look at a meritocracy or look at some kind of like, well, these guys are going, they have to fight each other. This is rare to have this many players. There's a couple of them at the top now who can just disrupt everything just because they can. They've done it. That's where they're at in the sport. Yeah. So, and that way, it's a little bit like boxing right now. It's a little bit like that. You got 2 stars that are literally so far above everybody else. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it'd be interesting. I don't know if he would accept that fight, but if we're talking about the sport kind of keeping any resemblance to what it's done in the past, that would be a good route to do it.
Yeah. And also, I just quickly want to add something else to that. Mm-hmm. You just talked to Dustin Poirier on Monday, and he said GSP's not fighting for the belt. he's not fighting for it, or I'm fighting him. So, you know, some of the contenders I like are open to fighting him because he is a big name. It is a big fight, and if they can get some pay-per-view points out of it, you know, then
That'd be kind of interesting.
It's
I
Yeah.
feel
It's
bad for
sad-
guys
it's
like
satisfying.
I love Dustin Poirier, I love Kevin Lee, I love all these guys, you know, Tony Ferguson, but I always feel like their voices can't be heard in that conversation. You know, it's like they
Yeah,
can't dictate.
but because they're structurally being held down.
Exactly.
Like
That's what I
Diaz
mean.
didn't become Diaz until he had an opportunity
Right.
to be exposed. These Dustin Poiriers, what can they
the
reasonably
big
do?
shot would be to get one of those guys, but how you get in there, that's how you do it. Like it's almost hard to fathom Poirier fighting McGregor again, ever fighting him again. I don't even, it's circumstantially right now, you know, it would be a good fight and all that stuff, but finding the route back to McGregor is hard math right now, man. You know what I mean? It's a hard thing to do. So I think the GSP thing it's kind of the same thing. You know, he's just over here. He's going to either gong the idea or he's going to accept it. And those guys, I just don't know if any of them have what it takes just to be like, I want that fight, and the other guy to be like, yes, that's a good fight for me.
Yeah, I just feel like your disruptor theory is correct. You know, it's a different scenario, but they didn't punish McGregor at all for this stuff, other than a little bit of bad PR when Dana White went on Get Up and ESPN and was like, this was a terrible day in UFC history, and then did nothing about it. And you could say, well, that's a punitive action, but the point being is...
Wait, didn't they take him off that card?
Yes, they certainly did. Whatever, 224? Yeah. But the point being is, if you have the kind of pull and the leverage and the business potential that these guys have, they will make some serious accommodations in your favor. So there's that. Now that brings us to the other kind of weird piece of the story, sort of, at least on the outside, which is Nate Diaz walking out of that presser, taking to Twitter, saying, F the UFC, I'm not fighting on that card. Did a little Johnny Cochran the other day on Twitter as well. You know, what was it? If they're not acting right, I can't fight if they're not acting right, something like that. You know, if the gloves don't fit, you got to quit. Anyway, so he's bitter. Again, speaking to Dustin, he says the fight's still on. We haven't heard anything that the fight is off. I don't know what's going to happen with that, Danny, but this is my question about it. Why do you think the UFC and Nate Diaz continuously find ways to not get along? Everyone's making it about a Diaz issue, and I'm not saying he doesn't play his role. I am certain that he does. But they just seem like a party that has a lot of difficulty working together.
Yeah, I feel like Nate Diaz has felt that all throughout his career, they've done him wrong. Like, when he got that Conor McGregor fight and he made that big payday, everybody's like, oh, how happy are you that you got all this money? He's like, happy. They owe me more, you know? So he feels like he still owes something. So I don't know what exactly happened. I think part of it is Diaz being Diaz. That's sort of who he is.
Sure.
But I think there's something to it. I think, you know, the fact that everybody sees McGregor as, you know, red panty night or whatever they want to call it, right? Like this guy that
Can I just say, I hate that term.
Yeah.
Every time I hear it, I'm always like, anyway.
But now I'm going to keep mentioning every time on the show.
I know you
so-
will. I know you will.
So everybody kind of sees McGregor as this, you know, the goal, right, to get that money fight. But I feel like Diaz sees McGregor eye to eye. So when he was at that press conference, he thinks he's a superstar, and he is.
He says he beat him twice.
Yeah, he's at that
Which
press.
is great. Every time he says that, it always resonates. It's great.
So he was at that press conference. They roll out the McGregor-Khabib thing, and he's like, all right, where's McGregor? Why is he not doing media? So I think that bothered him as well. The fact that he had to be there because we know he's not, you know, too fond of the media. And I'm sure there's other things in the back as well that we don't know if that perhaps happened. Or maybe he even thought he was going to be on the same card because we thought McGregor was going to fight in New York. Who knows?
Part of me wonders, man, if there's a psychological edge that he uses, just like his brother did, because if you remember, Nick back in the day would always talk about, I don't like fighting. I don't want to be fighting. I don't want to like being hit. I don't want to, you know. He had to find reasons to get in there and want to do this. And I feel like sometimes that they kind of harness that energy a little bit. I'm going to be mad at least at the UFC. If I can't get mad at Dustin Poirier, I want to be mad at something. I want to get something, you know. I almost wonder sometimes if there is a psychological thing with the Diazes to stir up that kind of thing to get them motivated for the fight, honestly. And this was another situation like that. I certainly believe that behind closed doors, and they've made this very clear, both Diaz brothers, but especially Nate of late, has been, you know, the lack of respect. I think he's always felt disrespected. I think he holds himself in a little bit higher of regard than the UFC probably does. And there might be this specific situation. He shows up a little late. There's the big pop. It's kind of the Nate Diaz show. Look, Nate's back. And then they, you know, kind of usurp his moment by putting that video at the end. And it's not only that, but it's his arch nemesis. And you put all those elements together, you're like, well, his actions are very Nate Diaz. But I do think that there's a bit of psychological thing, you know. he generates a different kind of animosity. It doesn't necessarily always have to be aimed directly at his opponent. It can sometimes be, because he did this a lot when they were fighting McGregor. A lot of it was, it went through the UFC. Both of them did. It was kind of a master
Felt like they were working together.
Yeah, it felt like they were actually, in league together to fight the man a little bit through that whole thing. I feel like he always likes to bring that element in, you know what I mean? Kind of have a chip on his shoulder against the company itself.
Yeah, my understanding is he was late. How do I explain this? He was late for reasons that had nothing to do with tardiness on his own. That there was a complicating factor that had to get resolved before he could get out there. So take that for what it's worth. But the thing that occurs to me is that two things. One, every perceived slight, fans are like, oh my God, are you going to get that upset about something like this? To just get over it, right? And so you can look at every individual slight and you can take that perspective. But the Diaz brothers, man, they're like elephants. They remember everything.
Yeah,
they remember every time that they felt like they were done wrong. So like all the other times where they felt like they got run over, they just have a hard time letting that go. I'd say to some degree to their own detriment. They kind of do need to let some of that go. It's just not going to change. And the reality is also this. I don't know if you want to blame the UFC for this. I'm not sure that I do. But like, if you're Nate Diaz, the only reason you got to the spot you were in is not because you didn't have talent or because your arguments that you should have been promoted more weren't correct. But I made this point previously. Not every corporate structure knows how to promote every entity. They don't know. They don't really. The UFC. They're good about promoting the Paige Van Zants. They're good about promoting. Conor takes off by himself. Yeah. They're good at that kind of thing. They're not really good at taking guys who run triathlons and smoke trash bags full of marijuana. Like they don't know what to do with that. And that's not to say that those guys can't be promoted because as Conor McGregor foils, or at least in the case of Nate, oh my God, this guy turns out to be one of the great heroes of the sport, for crying out loud. It's true he can. So my point being is, if that was the case all along, why would that all of a sudden change? Why would they all of a sudden, oh, now we figured it out? No. They understood how to use him relative to Conor McGregor, but now that that's not in the equation at the moment, they're back to where they were. They just don't know what to do with the guy. He's got all these old wounds, and then you get this constantly. I just don't know how this resolves itself, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I think this is something that's always going to exist. I feel like the
unless
UFC
he's fighting Conor. If he's fighting Conor, then he can just go do his own thing.
But even then, like, there's always going to be a little thing with the UFC. And again, it goes back to years of him fighting the top guys and only getting paid. Because remember, they had a lot of contract disputes in the past. So those are old wounds for Nate Diaz.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what you just said, I hadn't really considered it like that, but I think that that's absolutely true. You look back at Nate was, as much as he could fly under the radar, he was always the younger brother of Nick, and it was sort of an extension of Nick's attitude, right? Like, I felt like they dealt with Nick in their own weird way. Remember, they took Nick off of a card once on that one. It was at the title fight. Remember that whole thing? Because he missed the press conference, and you see that kind of behavior.
That's
like,
right. That's when. That's right.
So I feel like you're onto something with that. I feel like the UFC has just been like, well, this is a trial and error type of situation with these guys. But I think these days there's a little bit of a bemused smile on Dana White's face, which wasn't there before. Kind of like, well, this is just Nate being Nate, and the less they say about it, the better. He just kind of has stock answers for that sort of thing. But it's clear that he's kind of like, well, it's interesting dealing with the Diaz brothers. And they kind of leave it at that. And I think that people kind of understand that wink a little bit more nowadays.
Yeah, they're not nearly as combative, in part because they shouldn't be. I also think the Diaz brothers, like, they pull this card so often that they're always going to have a hardcore legion of fans. True. And that's never going to change. At the same time, though, for people who aren't that group, they're going to look at these, what do you want to call them, antics, choices they make, and they're not going to be sympathetic to them. I did detect a real degree of like, oh, yeah, come on, fellas. Like, or, this Nate's case, like, get it together.
It's just, he's always, I was in Orlando for his fight with Michael Johnson. This is really what made him into what he is, obviously, because he used the microphone well and showed a lot of people how to do this. But even in the pre-fight media scrums and all that stuff, he was, playing with the poster behind him. He was drawing his own name and stuff because he just felt disrespected. I just honestly believe that he builds himself up this way. Like, that's how he does it. It's a greater disgruntled thing he's trying to present rather than just some thing with Dustin Poirier.
Let's move along. UFC 227, that was over the weekend. Pretty great card. I missed much of it, if I can be candid. But I did see the main card. Certainly the main and co-main were absolutely incredible. Let's start with that main event. Danny, we had Brian Campbell on the show last week, and he made the points like, guys, TJ Dillashaw might be one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the sport. Not that I didn't think it was true, I just hadn't given it much consideration. Boy, after Saturday, I think you do have to consider that. Where is he ranked in your pound-for-pound rankings?
I don't think he's in the top 5, at least not yet.
Wow.
I think that he still has a lot of work to do.
Segura.
Top 5's hard to crack.
I think he has the potential of being a pound-for-pound great. I think he's definitely in the top 10, but to be like really one of the best, I think there needs some work to be done. Title defenses, continuity, because he had a few rough patches. I know the controversial decision with Dominic Cruz that could have gone either way, but nonetheless, it was a loss, right? So I think he still has work to do, but he has the door open to potentially reach that level for sure.
It's funny with him. I think we're reluctant to give him that kind of reverence in the strange way, because we've seen him lose a couple times. His first fight at the TUF finale gets knocked out, and I remember at the time thinking like, wow, I guess I kind of overrated TJ Dillashaw in this situation. Goes, I think he won he's had this pattern of win 4, lose 1. He's won 4 in a row, so watch out for his next fight. But his pattern has literally been that the whole way so far. But we've seen him lose in those last couple losses were razor thin, razor thin losses. So, but they were still losses in the sense of like, you move on, everybody moves on, and you start back again. If he doesn't have those, if he somehow wins those fights, I think that we'd have no trouble doing that, because you would almost look at that first Dodson fight as just a complete anomaly. That was a freak thing that happened. But I think it's just those losses, and it's just that he came up through the TUF franchise and everything like that, and the whole drama of him leaving the situation and following Dwayne Ludwig, all this stuff. I think that people have been really reluctant to kind of give him his due, but after seeing him do that to Cody Garbrandt twice, and not just that, but just kind of more of a mastermind too, in how he played the situation. Just the way he handled it and the way he beat him, and just standing in there and wanting to beat him in his own game a little bit. He certainly I would have to probably get him close. And I don't know if I'd put him at the top, but I would certainly put him in my top 5. You know what I mean? Like, I just think that he's proven that from himself over the course of
I would
time.
also like to add that his wins also haven't really aged too well. If you look at Conor McGregor's wins have aged.
That's why I said the guy can do no
He beat
wrong.
Max Holloway. Now look where Max Holloway
Dustin
is.
Poirier.
Dustin Poirier. I mean, you name it.
Yep.
But him beating Renan Barão, and super incredible feat. Renan Barão at that time looked incredible, but the Renan Barão that we saw then is not the same Renan Barão that we saw.
Yeah, but in
that's
part because of him.
Because of him.
And that's
But
what's
that still
strange about Garbrandt. If Garbrandt falls off, you'd be like, well, this guy has not just an knack for beating the guys who are like the hot thing, but
I mean,
putting
you
their
can look at it
souls
2
in a
ways.
jar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
you can look at it 2 different ways for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I would like to say. Also, the Joe Soto title defense. Again, I think technically, if you just look at what he does, dude, the guy has so many tools, and that's one of the reasons why I was favoring him over Cody Garbrandt. But man, I do think that you need some names in your resume. You need some title defenses in your resume before you can step in that conversation. What a
cruel fate, almost to look back on, Team Alpha Male, because he was the guy who kind of broke through, right? Like, he brought the title to them. Remember, we were always like, oh, they're the penultimate fighters. They always get to the moment, but they don't win the title. He wins it, and then he leaves, and then he goes, not only that, but he goes and beats the guy twice, who was the guy who brought it back to them. It's just one of these, cruel things that goes on and on, but Dillashaw, a ton of credit, because he doesn't fight emotion. I don't think he fights with emotion, but he holds it in check until he's done. You know what I mean? He's so skillful. He knows how to really divvy that up the right way for the fight.
And he distributes his emotion well within his.
He does.
He's very.
Yeah, this fight to me felt like the first time the fans were like, okay, that's the guy in the division, and he was always sort of coming up and then part of a rivalry or part of a story. He was never the guy, even as champion. I felt like he was never the guy who had done enough to begin to, as I think you alluded to it a week or 2 ago, put some distance between himself, not really for that rivalry, but with the division more generally. I think on Saturday it began to dawn on people, including me. I was like, ooh, this guy.
Not to mention, man, you talked about going back and watching the Holloway, the second Aldo fight, and seeing how he was kind of doing things in reverse of the way he did it the first time, and just some of it's when you see a guy who. So the Renan Barão fight, the series was very similar. I think a lot of people were like, well, that might have been a bit of a fluke. He hurt him in the first round, and Renan Barão never really recovered. So let's see what happens. Can he do that again? Well, he looks better the second time. I thought he looked better in the second fight. Garbrandt, there was a little bit of he almost got finished though at the end of that first round. Let's wait and see. He looks that much better in the rematch. These guys who learn from the facing the opposition the first time and they just know how to dial it in and beat them on every level, so they just kind of tinker with the board a little bit. Watch out for those guys, man, because I feel like that they're really cerebral type of fighters. They really know what they're doing, and I feel like he's proven that more than anything when he looks that much better in his rematches. That's why the Cruz one, I will say that fight potential has a lot. Like same with a Sunsao too, right? Like like that Cruz fight, I feel like because they're both such smart players. You put them both in there, they both make adjustments. I think that fight is fascinating from a technical standpoint.
It really is. We'll get to that in just a second, but I want to focus on the other half of this equation, which is Cody Garbrandt, Danny. What does the UFC do with him? 27 years old. I'm sorry, he still has all the athletic potential in the world, and you even listen to Dwayne Ludwig or other Justin Buchholz, and they're all saying, they're not saying he can't get better. These are not things that, he's stuck with. He can make actual technical fixes. But, man, he's done this, ride or die thing with Team Alpha Male, it seems like, for life. I'm not saying he can't get better there, but there are at least some questions surrounding what is the reason why a guy who is younger than TJ Dillashaw and who is at least as good as TJ Dillashaw physically, why is he making less progress? That doesn't compute typically. So now he's 27, lost to the guy twice. What should he do next?
It's interesting. We talked about this on the MMA Hour. On Fight Night, he was weighing just as much as Demetrius Johnson. I believe that was 142 pounds. And, man, this is the thing with the immediate rematches. I think immediate rematches should only be granted to people who have long title defenses, consecutive ones. And also guys who are older, guys who are in their 30s, like Anderson Silva when he lost the belt, or Jose Aldo. Guys who don't have, that they're not going to go back to the contender line and build their way back up. This was a huge mistake. Pairing him up back-to-back against TJ Dillashaw because he's so young, he's got so much potential, and now you put him in a really tough spot in the division. Honestly, if he stays, as long as TJ Dillashaw's champion, I feel like he's going to be champion for quite a bit because he's 32, but he's a lot younger in MMA years. He's just going to be in this weird area where, this Joseph Benavidez area. So I think I would like to see him drop down to 125, at least make the test. I mean, he was just weighing as much as Demetrius Johnson. Henry Cejudo was heavier, and I think Alex Perez, who also fought on the card at Flyweight, both guys that fought at Flyweight were heavier than the bantamweight fighters. So I would like to see him try at 125. I feel like he can reinvent his career there. Maybe some things don't go along like his power and his speed, and maybe 135 is his weight class, but at least I'd like to see it because at 135, at least for now, he doesn't have a very promising future.
He's still part of that bantamweight hydra, the three-headed monster of Cruz, Dillashaw, and Garbrandt, right? Because they all have the history together. So it's difficult to just be like, well, I'm just going to get out of this because he'd have to establish himself to an extent going the other direction, and he may be behind, he may have to pick up a fight before he gets a title shot at this point, all that type of thing. I wouldn't mind. If that's what he wants to do, more power to him. But I think he's still positioned well in terms of being at the top of the division. The only problem is now he has to wait for, fate's not his own. He has to wait for Dillashaw to lose to somebody to get that back. That's why I never really liked the idea, big picture rematch in case he lost, because now you are in that purgatory. Yeah. And, it kind of sucks because I think he is kind of a star in training. He fights emotionally. He's one of those guys who bent all of his raw nature from a rough childhood and everything and put it right into a gym and then manufactured it into a fighter, right? And I feel like that's what you're seeing. To go through an emotional fight the first time and the first loss, to then go back and do it again, that's a risky proposition. It's tough to come back in those situations. So it's the worst case scenario for him, but at the same time, I think that he's not positioned as poorly as maybe it seems. Because, Cruz and Dillashaw, if Cruz beats him, who knows, man? He could be right back in there and all this stuff. So his best bet might be to knock off or try to fight one of those guys who is just below those three. Maybe Marlon Moraes or one of those type of guys, and then start from there again and try to get back into it.
So then what should they do at Flyweight? Because that's still part of this equation. Henry Cejudo winning. I don't want to get into the scoring controversy, but he did call out TJ Dillashaw. Yeah. And you could say, well, no, there's no chance they should do that. But Demetrius Johnson may have we don't know the exact status, but he certainly thinks he had injured his knee. And if you looked at his foot on Instagram the following day, it was the old Chris Rock joke. Looks like they're baking bread in his shoe. It was just completely swollen beyond all belief. So the question is, let's assume he's out. Maybe he's not, but let's assume he's out before a reasonable title rematch can be made. Do they go with Sergio Pettis? Do you go to 135? What do they do with Henry Cejudo?
I think he has to defend the belt. I wouldn't like to see him at 135, a super fight. I mean, the 135 belt needs to be defended against contenders. Mm-hmm. That's just the fact. If you move it up, man, you're going to create a longer line that just
That's the last thing they need.
Yeah,
right now.
So I understand they want to get the super fight thing, but this is not really a huge super fight. Maybe if both defend their belts for a while. But anyways, he should just stay at 125 and defend his belt. Whoever the number one contender is, Jussier Formiga's out there, I think, on a little bit of a streak. Sergio Pettis, didn't Cejudo beat Sergio Pettis?
I believe so, yes.
Not too long ago. But he did beat, Joseph Benavidez and looked quite good doing it. So, tough spot. At this point, whoever's the number one contender, just keep the train rolling. That's what the UFC needs to do. Stop focusing on what's the big fight. No, just whoever the number one contender is, that's the guy who's fighting for the belt. That's it.
And Dana White's saying he's a little bit down with these super fights, which, thank God.
And here's the other thing. So we were talking about DJ moving up or inviting somebody down to challenge him because he's in a very specific circumstance. He built himself into a super fight scenario by the fact that we can't find any doubt in his matchups. We can't find the guy who we think might beat him. Well, that changes a little bit. You know what I mean? And I feel like I would like to see Cejudo just defend the belt if that's the case. Yeah. If Demetrius Johnson is available for it, I think that you have to make that trilogy fight. I would do that just because I think that there would be actual interest in that. In the end, you know what I mean? I would like to see that fight. But you can't just plug Cejudo into the super fight because he's not Demetrius Johnson. He doesn't have the same circuit. The transference doesn't happen that all of a sudden he inherits the exact situation where now he can go challenge. It doesn't work like that. There's nothing compelling. Yeah. The circumstances are also very different. So
0 title defenses versus
that's what
12.
I'm trying to say. Yeah. So it changes everything in that level. So you'd rather they do the trilogy fight or he defends it against any of these guys. Honestly, anybody that they want to deem worthy, get him a title defense before we have any of that discussion.
Yeah. What is the meritocratic threshold for rematches? And here's why I asked that. You had Demetrius Johnson, who I would agree, if someone asked you, who is the most deserving former champion who deserves an immediate rematch, you'd be like, well, it's Demetrius Johnson, without even having to really explain it, but you could if you wanted to. But I've seen Stipe sort of beat this drum, Stipe Miocic saying, I want a rematch, I deserve a rematch. Even so, going as far, on social media, taking a picture of Demetrius Johnson with a quote built in, and Demetrius was sort of making the case, or at least isn't driving the enthusiasm for his own desire to have a rematch. And I think Miocic had something like, current mood relative to that. I gotta say, it sounds demeaning, and I'm not trying to be. I honestly am trying to figure this out in good faith. I don't think it'd be the end of the world if Cormier fought Stipe again. I don't. I'd be okay. Sure. Yeah, I sort of get it. But the cases to me seem very far apart. I'm not all that interested in seeing a Stipe fight with DC. I could live with it. It doesn't do much for me, but to me it seems like there's an ocean in between. But there are a lot of people who disagree. There are people who say Stipe he's the winningest heavyweight champion of all time, and I'm like, yeah. Again, this sounds demeaning. I swear to God, I'm not trying to be demeaning. I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to noodle the problem through. It is just 3 defenses. Yeah. Now that's better than anybody else. So that should tell you something. But at the same time, that guy had 4 times as many. So in your mind, Danny, what's the appropriate threshold for a former champ to get an immediate rematch?
I think how long they've held that belt matters so much. Because, for example, Cody Garbrandt, he lost the belt immediately.
While they're active, though.
Yeah.
Because then you go back to the Conor case.
Right. I'm not talking about days. I'm talking about title defenses.
Got it, okay.
You can't just defend it once and then you demand an immediate rematch. Guys like Jose Aldo, Max Holloway. That was, but Jose Aldo was the king of the featherweight division.
Yeah, into that one.
But still. Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman, Demetrius Johnson, Henry Cejudo. So anything that, if it's controversial, say like a controversial split decision, and you have all those title defenses in your bag, you have the right to claim that. Also, age is a huge factor. Look, Anderson Silva was never going to go back to the line and build a long win streak and get back to the title. That's just not going to happen. Cody Garbrandt, the dude is how old? 26, 27? Yeah. The dude has so much left in his career. Let him build that up. Let him build the rematch. Demetrius Johnson, again, I don't know how old is he. I think he's probably 30 or around there.
31, 32-ish.
Again, this is a guy who's already proven he's a top dog. He doesn't need to build a contender. So if you've defended the belt enough times, get him in there. If it's controversial, get him in there.
It's so tough because obviously he's negotiated, in the public, in the media, he's negotiated for more money for certain matchups and everything. The best thing for the UFC and leverage-wise is for him to finally lose. So in this weird sense, you get like, well, now the UFC can actually dictate terms a little bit more that they probably wanted because you could never find a match. You could never match up. It was never flush, I should say, of where Demetrius Johnson win streak and all of his historic elements to where he's sold and what the UFC looks at it. So it's always one of these things like, okay, in some ways the UFC wins in a weird way because now they can book him easier right now against Cejudo because it's for a position for he's trying to get something back. that situation I would understand. If the UFC want to do it, forget about the win streak. I agree that all of that stuff, I think that would warrant it anyway, but I think that will play in to the UFC's mindset is like, okay, now he's kind of back to dancing to our beat a little bit. You know what I mean? I didn't really like the Garbrandt one because of these reasons, because there are guys, and I know that Hassan Sal just won and Marlon Moraes just won. They weren't in the exact same positions they are now, but I'm like, those guys existed. They were still close. You kind of want to see them start to work some people through.
So for me, it's like I look at the criteria and I say to myself, what could it possibly be, right? One is the nature of the first fight itself.
True.
That does not necessarily work out all that great in Stipe's favor. I don't think that's a very
First
controversial statement. Second one is what kind of business would it do? Now, the first one did a lot. Second one probably wouldn't do as much because it's not nearly as novel, but it wouldn't be a disqualifyingly low amount. I think you'd be okay there. And the other one is like, who are the other available contenders? I think that's a strong argument for him.
True.
And the other one is like, what is his resume that would necessitate it? For me, his resume does qualify to say this is something we should consider. It's just people are like, oh, it's a slam dunk case. And I'm like,
there are no slam dunk cases.
Right. It doesn't feel like and I could be, again, I don't have a firm argument other than to me, I don't know. Like, I don't feel like, man, I run that back.
Sometimes what you just said, feel. I think it is a feeling sometimes. Like when Chael Sonnen dictates 4.5 rounds against Anderson Silva, what were we thinking when he gets caught in the end? That rematch is going to, like, you knew there had to be a rematch. There was no question there was going to be a rematch because of the way the fight went down. I think that is a big, big factor. I think that just doing it on merit alone sometimes is what causes this exhaustion with rematches because people are like, well, we just saw this. Doesn't captivate the imagination the second time. There's got to be something that fuels it from the first fight that says we have to see a resolution.
If that fight had been reasonably competitive, I'd be like, okay, we're back. But he got finished in the first.
And how fun is it to contemplate Brock Lesnar against DC? It's just a fun fight to contemplate.
It's new.
That's what I'm saying.
MMA needs more new.
100%.
I feel like it needs a lot of more new.
So every case is a little different. Also, you know what I mean? But
you got to look. Is the immediate rematch healthy for the division? You got to watch out for the health of the division as well.
It might be necessary given who else is out there to be perfectly candid. But
for example, given the fact that there's no contenders at flyweight, really, the Demetrius Johnson, sure, bump him in there, but Cody Garbrandt, TJ Dillashaw, you got tons of contenders, so why the immediate rematch? Yeah. At heavyweight, sure, there's no clear contender, but you got Brock Lesnar. Yeah. So
it's crazy too because we were talking off the top of the show. McGregor owning 4 of those spots in the top 5 pay-per-views of all time. The other one was UFC 100, and the one directly below that is the Carwin-Lesnar fight at UFC. So you're looking at those and you think, well, if they can plug Lesnar back into a scenario where he's fighting somebody like DC, you got to look at it from the health of the big picture too. Like that's a nice thing to have to contemplate.
You know? It's always this tension between how do we maximize business and interest and not do somebody wrong. So the question is, if we didn't give Stipe the immediate rematch, would we be doing him wrong? You certainly wouldn't be doing him any favors. True. But I don't feel like you'd be the wrong argument. You're already number 1 contender. You go and beat Curtis Blades, you're right back there. And by the way, I would favor Stipe to beat Curtis Blades, even as good as Curtis Blades is. So to me, it's like, and I'm just trying to noodle it through because we kind of have to think about it. I think it's going to happen more and more as guys hold titles and then lose
Unfortunately, there's never a straight line in any of this because when you look at a guy like Stipe Miocic, we've talked about this a million times. We love him. He's, from inside the bubble, we really love him. He was great when he was in Cleveland. I felt like that was the biggest pop he'll ever get, but I just don't think he translates on that other level. So, and sometimes we see the UFC make a decision based on their business, and you think like, I don't have to agree with that. That sucks. That's just you trying to make. There's other times where they do something where you're like, well, yes, I know what you're doing, and it's compelling. And when you have both of those things together, it's kind of like a slam dunk. You have to do that, right?
And I made this point before. If you're a fighter out there, particularly the kind who's in bouts of consequence, either the top of the division or for big money, you always need to remember over the course of your career, there are many levers you can pull to get paid. Yeah. Even if you don't like it. I had Israel Adesanya on the show on Monday, and I couldn't believe he did it. The dude got up at 4 a.m. in New Zealand time. Now, he was laying on his side the whole time. But I was like, that's cool with me, man, because, dude,
awake.
And his answer was, and I'll never forget, Dominic Cruz, too, one time was cutting weight. This was for the Demetrius Johnson fight. I'll never forget. And he had this look on his face. He was covered in sweats and covered in towels. And he had this look on his face. He was laying on the ground, just pouring sweat. And you could just tell he was just trying to just get through the day. And someone had asked him to come to an interview with me, and he was like, I saw him collect himself. He goes, okay. And I was like, are you sure you want to do this? And he said the exact same thing Israel Adesanya said. He goes, it is part of the job. If you don't pull that lever often enough, when it comes back around and you need it and you don't have it, I don't know what to tell you. That's
absolutely right. Absolutely right.
All right. So that takes us to this other interesting person who has been pulling a lot of levers but came up short at UFC Calgary, but we got a little bit of news about Eddie Alvarez. That was the last fight on his deal. I have made this point before. I thought that that was the right gamble to take. He got paid more in his last Bellator fight than he did in his last UFC fight prior to Calgary. So why not bet on yourself? And, you know, he thought he probably had a good chance against Dustin Poirier. In the end, it didn't go his way. Dana White saying on the UFC Unfiltered podcast this week, I believe, that, you know, look, they want to keep Eddie. They're going to make him an offer. But if Eddie wants to go somewhere else, he would totally understand. Chuck, what should Eddie do? What will Eddie do?
Well, that's kind of the way that was kind of worded was very sort of like, yeah, take it or leave it, you know. And I feel like that's always
It was a little nicer. It was a little
nicer, but I mean, ultimately, you're like, it's still kind of a negotiation in public type thing. Like, yeah, you know, we're going to survive without him. So good luck if he does go the other direction, you know, that sort of thing. That was old Dana White. That's all I was pointing out, kind of vintage Dana White moment. But what he should do, honestly, is probably make the most money. I think his legacy is probably where it's going to be. I think he's done, you know, he was a UFC champion, man. He came in, he did that. He's had he had big fights, you know, like he's had some big moments. He's had some good wars afterwards, like where people were talking about him. You know, what was he calling himself? The King of Violence, or the King of Violence, or Violent Champion. Where it's like, you know, he kind of established this, you know, and he rebounded so well off that McGregor loss. I felt like I saw his resiliency in other ways. Like he rebuilt it, man. People didn't no longer were talking about it like he got worked that way. You know what I mean? Like, so he's still in a good position, but I don't think he needs to overly worry about what does this mean for my legacy. If he wants to get paid and he enjoys fighting, you know, maybe he goes back to his original home. We were talking about this a little bit last week. He was at Bellator. He fought at Bellator 1, and I think that it would be like this weird twist of fate for him to end up back there. And who knows? Maybe he ends up becoming their champion again, because he's certainly not. You probably know a little more than me. I don't know if you've perceived a big time drop off in his talent or anything like that. There might be a little bit more of. I think he's been out there kind of throwing. I feel like he's the same guy.
Basically the same level he was before, but I think his fighting ability in terms of IQ and how to follow a game plan has risen while some of his athleticism has dropped. So it's still a wash at this point, but he's at that tipping point.
I mean, if I'm him, I'm probably going to take, you know, he is a family man. I'm probably going to take the best offer at this point. And I feel like if Bellator wants to give it to him, they want to bring that back. If I'm him, I'd certainly give that a real look. You know, especially if he's going to play like a gatekeeper or something like that in the UFC, his better route might be over there.
And look, the UFC is full of contenders at lightweight. They don't need one more. I mean, they got tons of contenders. And he's talked about, again, leading up to that fight, it was all about the money. And it wasn't even a belt. He openly said it. The only belt I cared about is being the most, you know, violent fighter.
Yeah.
So he doesn't even care about the belt. And what is part of his legacy, I think, would be that wherever he went, he got a belt. I mean, he's got a belt in almost every promotion he's fought. So
he has one of the most impressive resumes of any fighter ever, certainly in that.
So look, you already got a belt in the UFC. Yeah. You already headlined one of the biggest pay-per-views ever. You don't really care about the title anymore. The UFC lightweight division title picture is a mess. You're only going to get the big money if you get another title shot. True. Look, just go to Bellator. They can promote you more. They can use you more. You can pick and choose where you want to fight a little better, perhaps even the opposition. You know, we know Bellator gives these guys with big names a little bit more leeway in them picking their future. Go there, make some big money, and look, you had a great career in the UFC.
He's been in some of the biggest. Yeah. Well, he's been in not the biggest. He's been in some of the most fan-friendly fights probably of anybody active fighter right now. I mean, there's been like so many of them. The Chandler fight back at the same night as the Hendo. Remember that? The Shogun, you had both coaches, they were both going off.
It was a great night.
Yeah. I mean, he's been involved in
he's one of those few guys who has a resume where you're like, damn, that guy was in sick fights, and also look at all these wins.
Yep.
So usually it's a trade-off, or at least some bit of a trade-off. So I agree. I think if he gets I mean, I don't know how much, if I was me and I'm 33 and I have kids, how much I want to fly to, you know, Kuala Lumpur to fight at one championship. But if they're paying you sick cash, then take the money when it's there, because I think I agree. Although, you know, look, the truth is there might be some great opportunities for him in the UFC. It's not like they would pay him poorly, but you know, you look at the Cub Swanson scenario where he stayed with the UFC and now he's fighting these Anato Moicanos, and
that's a tough fight,
that's a tough place.
That's the problem. They put you against the buzzsaw is coming up. All these younger dudes who are like, look like beasts.
You're that old war horse. Well, here's the new war horse.
What I mean.
You're like, fuck,
it's even if you don't want to call it gatekeeper, it literally by definition is kind of what they do with these guys. You know.
So there's a couple issues that happened in the MMA social media sphere this week. Well, not one was social media, but long story short, I have noticed something, boys. So I don't think the Darren Till thing is all that bad, to be honest with you. I don't agree with what he says, and he has since explained it was just about, like, in camp, I need to be selfish. I wanted to tell you the story. This is a true story. I'll never forget this. When Darren Till said what he said, I saw everyone on Twitter being, like, super outraged about it. And if you guys don't know, he had said, you know, I got a kid, I don't really care. I got another kid in Brazil, I don't really care. I got a girlfriend, I don't really care. Because it's just all about me. And people were, like, horrified by this. I was not horrified by this, and I'll tell you why. Look, if you bring life into the world, you are ultimately responsible for it. I mean, that goes without saying. But I had a guy, one of my drill instructors at boot camp, I'll never forget this. He was a force recon Marine. You knew that because he had the scuba bubble and the jump wings, yeah? And he had talked about it all the time. And that's the special forces of the Marine Corps. Dude, our second to last day, he takes us all aside, and I swear to God, I've never forgotten this in my life. This dude was built like a brick S-house. He was a maniac. He never slept. He never ate. I only ever saw him drink water. He had a 300 PFT, which is the highest score. He was Captain America, okay? And he looked at us one day on that last day, and you're sort of out processing, doing paperwork and stuff. And he brought us all together, and he goes, I just want you all to know that I hate all of you. I hate I hate my wife, and I hate my kids. And he was dead serious. And he goes, when this is over, I'm going back to recon. And that was basically it. And I sat there being like, okay, you hate me. Like, so do my parents. I mean, this ain't nothing new. You hate your wife. Not great, but I can understand it. You hate your kids, too? Like, Jesus Christ, man. But, you know, he was an excellent Marine. I don't know what you want me to tell you. He was a model Marine, right? So when he said that, I kind of got it a little bit. But there have been some other incidences. The Khabib Nurmagomedov filming the homeless doing push-ups, people, you know, deranged people trying to, like, defend this. Although I don't think it's the end of the world either. But this is my point. What keeps happening is I'm noticing behavior over and over again, and each incident itself is not the end of the world. And I go to bed sleeping just fine. I don't think these people are necessarily bad people, that they're making bad choices. But I've noticed the UFC, remember, they used to fine Nate Diaz for gay slurs. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Boy, those days are over. And I have noticed something, Danny. Tell me if I'm, like, imagining things. My hunch is that the UFC doesn't want to exert control over these fighters, because the more control they exert with this handbook, this code of conduct, remember when Matt Mitrione was saying terrible things about Fallon Fox, they have dialed that back, because I think the more they exert that control, they run into problems about independent contractor versus employee. And as a consequence, there is no institutional pressure to keep these kinds of things under a lid. All of us have said bad things. All of us have done bad things. But if you're a company and you're trying to make deals with ESPN and get sponsors, you're trying to do something with that, you usually want to keep a lid on it. My hunch is that they just can't. And so remember that scene in Ghostbusters when Peck, whatever his name was, pulls the lid on the projector grid and all the ghosts shoot into the atmosphere? I think that's what's kind of happened here a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the UFC is walking a very thin line where before it was they controlled everything. If they didn't like something, they would shut it down. But then with the rise of McGregor and a few other things where fighters started taking control over the company, we started noticing that they would take certain action and there would be repercussions, you know, whether it's outlash on Twitter, whatever the case may be. That is a bad look, you know, and especially when they've brought things like Reebok, which the fighters haven't really been too happy about. When the TV deal's up, they sell the company and fighters find out how much the company's worth, right? I mean, they're trying to, you know, balance all these things out and walk this very thin line, and that's part of it. You know, it's hard to tell a guy, you can't do this, you can't do that. But then, you know, what are you, an employer or independent contractor, you know? So they're definitely walking the thin line, and that's one of the things that, look, it's not a good look if a UFC fighter is doing this on the brand, but hey, is it really worth, you know, getting in there and getting some punishment?
Is there anything to my theory?
Yeah, there's a lot to that there. I think when you have associations, like you guys mentioned, to Reebok, you have associations to soon ESPN, you know, like the bigger the associations, the more you wonder if they'll have to do this. But we've thought this before. Like, I've thought that they would be doing a lot more under Fox. I thought, like, well, you're affiliated to something that's legitimate. You're going to have to punish guys, you know, that mess up. The bottom line is, though, there's more wiggle room in the fight game. Everybody knows this. You know that the fringe players are going to let them go out a little more. They're going to be a little crazier. They're going to get by with more stuff, just given the nature of our sport. But I'm a little surprised, to be completely honest, but I think that you are dead on. I don't think that really think that they can do them. I don't think they can do much.
I was trying to think. The MMA fan base is like, well, they'll gaslight you. They'll make you question your own sanity. Like, I'm pretty sure they used to hammer fighters for this back in the day.
Yeah, they did. There were certain examples for sure that they did.
And now it's like, they don't say anything at all. And you're just trying to figure out, well, why is that? And again, I'm not here to ask everyone to get outraged. I sleep at night just fine. I'm not really worried about it all. Other than to say, like, as a media member, you watch this, it's like, what do I say about this? Because there's going to be another rock and another worm tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that.
And it's always situational.
And the day after that. Like, what do you even say anymore? It's like, all right, you just kind of let it go. But
there's too much hypocrisy, too. Like, it's like, the bottom line is if Conor McGregor's trying to throw a dolly through a window and they're not going to do anything because of who he is, it's like people see this, they see this kind of, and you're like, well, why are you coming at me? Who was the guy who hit the ref or kind of, and he was kicked out?
Paul Daly.
Well, not him. That was
Jason Hyde?
Yes.
Well, Mike Kyle hit a referee back in the day as well.
And there has been no consistency on that sort of thing. And I think that somewhere along the way, they're like, hey, we got to be careful of the precedents we start as well. We can't just punish one guy and kick him out, and then somebody else does it later we want to keep, we covet more. We made an example, and we can't do that to this guy. I think that there's been a lot of that stuff. I think it's going to have to be, honestly, one of the big associations. I don't know if it'd be Reebok or ESPN. It'd be interesting with ESPN.
Well, people have said, what do you think is going to happen if fighters do this when they go to ESPN? Nothing.
Yeah.
We'll
see, though.
Unless you have it a totally, like, egregious scenario.
True.
Then maybe something. But even then, I'm like, I don't know.
It's almost like they're just going back to a mindset of like, hey, it's fighting. You just, you know what I mean? Kind of roll your eyes and just keep going.
Like, the truth is, I like some of that about MMA, where we don't get offended by every single thing. There is some of the value to that. But that can go a little too far the other way, where you just don't care about anything, and that's a little too much. It's funny. Everyone complains about like how boring sports talk radio is.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's boring because they only talk about the sport for the most part. Yeah, Urban Meyer's getting raked over the coals at Ohio State because he may have covered up domestic violence, but neither here nor there. But generally speaking, the employee, like, there's a good reason to make fighters employees. First and foremost is to protect them. Second of all is to protect them from themselves.
Yes,
so that institutional pressure can bear down on them, and everyone can just make this about what it is, which is the sport. You guys want a sport, or they mostly just talk about the sport? Listen to your local sports talk radio. You'll be hearing everything about, who's going to be in the secondary for the new Raiders offense. Like, you're going to get plenty of that. All right, very, very quickly, just a minute here left or so. The Bellator tournament was set up. All of them are going to be 5-round fights. The belt is on the line every single time there's a fight there. Rory McDonald has not one but 2 fights, which is crazy.
That is crazy.
Isn't that insane? He's got 2 at the same. My man's plate is full.
And one of them's a tournament, which you could then parlay into more fights.
I know, right? So, Chuck, I'll go to you very quickly. Do you like how they paired the tournaments? They have the Koreshkov Lima rematch, MVP Daly. They've got Gracie Ruth, and then they've got Fitch McDonald. Do you like that?
I do. I do like it. I especially love that they started with the Daly MVP thing, because I think that that's a big fight. It's going to automatically bring in attention, honestly, to the whole tournament, because those guys have beef and they both are good talkers. So I looked down the pairings and I was like, I don't know which ones I would have switched, but I honestly like it. Especially in the Gracie Ruth one, too. I feel like that's the right one in that bracket. Right.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I love about this tournament is that the fact that the belt is going to be on the line the whole time. So it could change 2 or 3 times, it could change champions. And I think that's great, because one of the big things about Bellator was the lack of storylines. The UFC is full of storylines. Bellator, it almost felt like, look, you have a big name, let's fight. Now you got an opportunity to create storylines. Imagine if Rory loses the belt, but then somebody picks it up later on, and then all of a sudden the tournament's over, and then you got all these guys. It just, I don't know what's going to happen, but man, the amount of storylines that can come out of this are huge.
It's like the old Bellator model, but like gussied up. Like, it's got hydraulics on it.
Everyone says it's the old, it's like a pimp my ride.
You got
it is the old Bellator model. Remember, folks forget about this. Bellator would run these tournaments with every weight class every season. So you couldn't tell, like, who's in the bantamweight semis and then the featherweight quarters, and it just got overwhelming. But if you're selective about it, you space it out a little bit. I got to say, I love that pairing on all of the brackets. And I got to say, if
Ed Ruth versus
Demon Gracie, dude, Ed Ruth is your dark horse in that tournament.
And this might be the coolest, honestly, the coolest thing they've done.
Dude, this is, again, we'll see how the fights go. Hopefully no one gets injured, everything goes. But if it goes as planned, dude, this is a home effing run.
Because all
for
guys are
Bellator.
compelling. There's not 3 guys and then 5 guys that are just, we just picked him up. And you know,
all true welterweights.
This guy's not really a welterweight. He's a middleweight. He's a lightweight.
You got a trilogy fighting Koreshkov and Lima.
Yeah,
you got the Paul Daly and, you know, MVP beef. You know, Rory just
And you can take that, by the way, we talked last week how they're signing all these Bellator guys in the UK. You take that fight to the UK, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Guaranteed home run. So, I don't know. There's still a lot of ways that can go wrong because that's just how MMA works. But it looked to me like Coker took what worked with the heavyweight Grand Prix from Strikeforce, brought that back, and then made some edits. Remember, they're going to have Fedor versus Overeem fight in that semis, but then Bigfoot came along and beat Fedor and just got everything blew up. They made Semtex versus MVP in the quarterfinals. That was absolutely the right call.
Yeah.
So
It's gonna be fun, man.
So shouts to Bellator. They did a very, very good job. And that promo video was, dude, I was like, Bellator, you might be, I'll be nice. I'll be nice. Great job, Bellator. Great job. Okay, so we've been taking your tweets really all week and all show long at the using the hashtag right there, the MMA Beat. We have selected some. We're going to answer that now on our other segment called After the Beat. Don't go anywhere. That's coming up right now. All right, we're back. Luke Thomas, MMA Fighting, Sirius XM, MMA Fighting owned, Danny Segura, and then MMA Fighting and the Ringers. I say the hard G there. Chuck Mindenhall, the man in the hat.
Didn't get you under the radar in the last segment.
Oh, I forgot it. You want to do that right now?
Sure.
Very quickly? Very quickly? We'll do that at the end of this.
Okay, there you go.
We'll do it at the end of this one. Yeah, thank you for keeping me honest. I botched that. Well, you know, what are you going to do? I'm tired. Okay, we've selected your tweets using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We will get to them now. Who is up first? Okay, do MMA media give Nate Diaz undeserved praise? Every time he plays hardball with the UFC, he's called smart. Yet when other fighters hold out in order to get what they want, they're often criticized. Who is often criticized for holding out? I'm not sure that's true. Is there some difference between Diaz's approach, Danny, and theirs?
Well, I think the question is off because I don't agree with what's being stated.
You don't agree with the premise. Do we give as MMA? I wanted to put this in because MMA media should own up to the criticism that it receives, whether it's fair or not, so you can answer for it. So are we too kind to Nate Diaz? I would say we are, actually. In sometimes.
Maybe there is something there because, you know, we've seen Nate Diaz, I don't know, go through what he's been through, and we know, you know, I think he was getting paid like 15 and 15, and then we see, you know, Sage Northcutt making 80, and you go, man, and you know what kind of wars that guy's been in, and you know what he's done for the sport as well. Him and his brother, they're crucial for this sport. So you kind of, you know, see some things that perhaps are unfair. So, you know, we are media, but we're also humans, so we sympathize to that. But we also look at where the moves that Nate Diaz has done leads to. So you cannot disregard that. You cannot say, oh, it's dumb. You know, it is smart moves. You know, look at where he is today. This is a guy that was getting paid $30,000 per fight. Now he's one of the biggest superstars. And not only that, but at where he made that in his career pretty late, it almost felt like Nate Diaz was going to be who he is. And he turned into a completely different fighter.
Somewhere along the way, he locked the media in this idea that he was fighting a bigger cause. I think that's where this whole
point.
I think that like whatever reason the media. I agree that the media has been probably more forgiving of him and more embracing of him and more idolizing of him in a lot of ways. Like for that reason alone, I think that he's just something along the way. He seemed like he was fighting a bigger cause, and if that's still the case, I don't know. That's also a reason when he comes back, there was so much compelling about when he comes back. Will he be the star that people are projecting him to be without Conor McGregor?
Yeah.
And will he translate, I guess, in general, when he comes back? So it's one of those situations where that Dustin Poirier fight has a lot of weird subplots to it, and it'd be fun to see how that all pans out.
Yeah, my thought is, are we too kind sometimes? But I think that's a great point you made. Like he attached himself to a larger narrative about, it wasn't a selfish cause for self-aggrandizement, although there'd be nothing wrong with that. But it might be that, and hey, I've been a guy and also I've been wronged forever. You know, I'm the Count of Monte.
Right.
He's MMA's Count of Monte Cristo.
You're 100%. That's it.
What's next? Why don't more women watch MMA, Chuck? What, if anything, does it say about those that do watch? Now, be gentle with the second one.
Oh, man.
What is it? I like how they like MMA. It's like, what's wrong with her?
I've certainly seen an uptick in female audience, though. So you follow the sport a long time. It used to be, and they used to always talk about the demographic being these young males between like 18 and 34 or whatever it was. That's certainly been, I'm sure that's still a very big core, but I feel like the female audience has grown, obviously, in the whole Ronda Rousey thing, and just how
Women
this,
generally,
and women in general. I mean, you go to you do jujitsu and things like that. I'm sure there are plenty of females around.
Yeah, but jiu-jitsu, Danny can tell you this too, it's very different.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu is a participatory sport.
Well, let's put it this way. I feel like I've personally seen, in the time I've been covering the sport, far more, women paying attention to the sport. I don't know if it's directly related to Ronda Rousey. I think that was a part of it, the whole women's, bringing the women into the UFC. But there's also a part that I think that, for men too, but I think that this was slower on the take broadly. Like, you have to get used to watching MMA. It's like something that's very startling at first, and if you don't want to look at it, and you keep like, I don't really like it, you'll never get, I don't want to say immune to what's going on there, but you never start to appreciate on love. So you've got to sit down and watch it, and I think that at some point that started to happen, and so I feel like there's been a bigger influx of viewership that way. Like, I think there's been a lot more women. I don't think it's nearly as much as men, but I interact with a ton of women on Twitter, about this stuff all the time. So I feel like it's a lot more than it used to be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've recently met like a few girls that like tune into MMA, and they know, like they will talk about Nate Diaz and all the storylines and all that. So I do think it's growing. As to why not so many in the past have tuned in, I would say there's probably a lot of factors. One, that, women's MMA is something somewhat recent. I mean, it's something that Ronda Rousey brought on, really. Before that, it was kind of kept in the dark. And now it's mainstream in MMA. And I don't know why else, but I do just want to share a story. I used to work at the Harley Davidson in Florida.
Did you really?
Yeah.
What did you do?
I fixed bikes. I'm just kidding.
I was like,
No, I worked. There was a cafe there, and I was a waiter. And so
what do people order at the Harley Davidson cafe? That's interesting.
dude, we had a full-on restaurant, like
Really?
burgers, sandwiches. It was more like American food.
Okay, I'm so tuned out. I have no idea.
But anyways, my manager was there, and it was kind of like a slow day, and I was like, hey, can I put some UFC fights on the TV? That's when it was on Fuel. So I put some replays, and Chris Weidman was fighting Mark Munoz, and I'm like, all right, yeah, I've seen this like four times.
That was a great fight.
I was like, I've seen this like four times, but I'm all about it. So I'm like working, and just watching this fight. They come out, whatnot. It's full of bikers. And there's like a couple girls there. And then Chris Weidman just slashes him with the elbow, and then it was a late stoppage too, and just beats.
Yeah.
And like there wasn't that many women. There was one that I could remember. She stood up from her seat and started screaming. And she's pointing at the TV, and she's going, oh my God, he just killed him. And she's freaking out. And my manager's like, yo, turn that shit off. And I'm like trying to turn it off. And everybody else was just unbothered. So I don't know. I think the sport is very violent. So, it's not for everyone. I don't know. That was just a story.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about it. Like, there are women who were watching MMA before Rousey, and there's always been women's MMA. Well, not always, but there's been women's MMA dates back a little bit while longer. But let's say inside the UFC, there's not always been women, right? So there's been women who were watching MMA during this period where it was, let's say 5 UFC weight classes, 2006-ish, right? And then when there was a Ronda Rousey and we brought women over, there was an extra audience. So you have to ask yourself, what was the difference? Well, one was probably just the mere visibility of MMA that attracted some more women. But I think it's a real simple truth, man. People want to see who they are reflected back in the world. If you're a woman, you probably, some are they're going to love watching men's MMA. But, my wife perks up a little bit more when Kayla Harrison's on the TV.
Right.
When Ronda Rousey was fighting, when Miesha Tate was fighting, she got a little bit more interested.
Alan Jouban is fighting.
Yeah, or Alan Jouban. Alan Jouban is on the walls at my friend's gym, which is kind of weird. I was like, Alan, what are you doing here? In any case, but the point being is, I made this point before. Like, did you guys notice on the Contender Series? We didn't even get to the Ultimate Fighter because we just ran out of time. But on the Contender Series, man, there were so many African American prospects this year.
Yeah.
And you're like, what are you looking for? Racial quotas? No, I'm not looking for racial quotas. But let's noodle this through. What are historically strong fight communities? The Latin and the African American communities. Yeah. To the extent you can make inroads in rock-ribbed fight fans, might be a good idea to do that. And I'm noticing that so many more are coming up. That will ultimately mean, I think, over time, a larger portion of the African American audience that they don't have right now, or eventually the Latin American audience, or all the various demos, they're going to begin to pull them in more. It's good for the sport to get that. And so what does it say about women who watch? Says they're awesome. That's what it says, Or, like me, also damaged, brain damaged. They give you that too. But it probably means they have great taste. They just want to see more of themselves in the sport represented, and I get that. That's a natural thing. All right, what's next? All right, Chuck. What's the best way to get over a girl who ripped your heart out?
Oh, man. Jesus.
Now, he didn't say what's the only way or what's a bad way. What's the best way?
Go to the bar, man. I don't know.
I'm gonna agree with that.
You ever had your heart ripped out, Danny?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Just time, I guess. Just,
That's great. The sage advice, Yoda.
Yeah.
John Denver on records, vinyl. Just, no, I'm just kidding, man. Go to the bar. Get back on that
Keep
horse.
busy as well. I think that's important.
Keep busy. It's a big...
a lot of time by yourself. You think a lot as well. So whether it's work, whether it's a sport,
Sir,
get
European,
involved
you
in
picked this
something.
I mean, there's not many problems in the world you just can't pour alcohol on top of and find some kind of a solution, whether that's the right one or not. I don't know. I'm just thinking about this. It's like, what's the best way to deal? There is no best way, right? There is no best way. All of them are painful. Like, if you think there's a way to get around this, and forget even girl ripping your heart out, like a terrible thing that happens to you, right? What's the best way to get around it? There is no best way, other than you don't want to engage in so many vices that you compound your problems. But the reality is, man, life is about, I have found, I could be wrong, I have found it is very much about, there is no way around the fire or over the fire. It is through it.
Right.
And so once you begin to just accept you are going to suffer, it is finding a way to steel yourself through the suffering. And then that's it. It's not that complicated, really. It's just hard to do.
Who hurt you, Luke?
Wow. Ready? Here we go. Let's list them. I've had a couple of bad breakups, but I had one that was bad. But you know what? Like a fart in the wind, they all pass through eventually, don't they? Yes? So just steel yourself and then don't drink too much, Don't do what Danny does, just constantly boozing. No, I'm teasing. Just life is a lot about pain. So just deal with it. That's it.
Face the pain.
Face the pain, folks.
Pain.
All right, MMA Beat panel, starting with Chuck.
Oh, man.
As more and more people from the younger... let me start with Danny on this one. As more and more people from the younger generation become fans of the sport, Danny, we're talking about you, is the entire pay-per-view outlet going to die off in 3 to 5 years? Even the older generation fans I know of, which is oddly capitalized, are all live streaming pay-per-view. Okay, I think he means stealing? I don't know.
I think so.
Because you can buy pay-per-view online for the same price. Thanks, fellas.
Yeah.
What do you think, Danny?
I think it will, because if you look at most of my friends, they're all subscribed to Netflix or Amazon or HBO because they want to watch Game of Thrones, whatever it is. They're subscribed to something and they want to get a constant feed. Man, dropping $60, especially I don't know, most millennials are broke.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Dropping $60, $65, that's a lot of money. I mean, that's like a phone bill, So, and doing that every month, it's very expensive to be a fan. I'd rather just, pay a fee and then, get something out of it. I think it will. I think pay-per-view is an old model, and it's something that has to change. I think for now, there's still whenever there's a really big fight, I'm sure, guys are down to, pay some money and get all their friends in their house and watch the fight.
I don't think that will ever die.
Yeah.
But everything else might.
Yeah. So, and I think it'll dial down and it'll be more specific. Like, you want to watch Conor McGregor? All right, pay some, and people will be down to do that. But this whole thing where it's kind of just like, oh yeah, just pay for pay-per-views every month. Nah, it's not really.
Yeah, when they started this Fox deal, I guess 7 years ago now, I remember hearing questions like this too. Like, people were like, will this kill the pay-per-view model in the end? And here we are 7 years later and it's still going basically intact. It's still the same thing. But I do sense that it can't sustain, at some point that will have to change. I don't know to what extent. Yeah. That's an interesting thing about the kind of piecemeal thing. If you're, more like a la carte with these type of things, I don't know if they'll eventually start to look at something like that. One thing I will say about the UFC, they're very innovative ultimately when it comes down to it. Sometimes I feel like UFC as a sport contributed more to Twitter's growth than just about every other sport. The way they used it originally, and all that stuff, They're just very innovative.
The NBA was good too.
Yeah, the NBA was always very good, but the UFC immediately embraced it.
And the UFC's YouTube channel might be the best one in all.
So they're innovative, and I know that they'll when it's time to transition into something else, they'll have a plan.
Yeah.
But I don't really know what it'll be. But in 3 to 5 years, I could see it being fairly altered from the way it's
I don't know what happened to the way we imagine our bills, because in some ways, I want to get into a larger argument about wage stagnation, but just hear me out on this. When the bundle was around, you had your cable bill and your phone bill, and maybe, of course, your utility bills and stuff, but it was kind of all relatively organized. As that has come apart at the seams, you're seeing people try and chip away at it a little bit. Well, here's a bill for me, I have to pay for the Washington Post to get behind the paywall. Now I got ESPN Plus, and I pay for Sirius XM, even though I'm an employee.
What?
And it's so, don't even get me started. But
I get it for free, and no, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
But here's the other part about that. Beyond that, though, I'm not a big video game guy. I had my Xbox stolen, but I'm told that there are certain games where not only do you have to make in-game purchases, but there can be recurring charges month over month for certain kinds of updates or as the game progresses, like these micro charges.
Fortnite.
Right. There's these micro charges that's happening. And so as those concrete bills have begun to dissolve into a bunch of little bills, for some reason, I feel like it's made making that one pay-per-view purchase even harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though the money might be relatively the same, the more that you get cut 1,000 ways, that other big one, you look at it and you're like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm already paying 15 for this, 5 for that, 10 for this. It just makes that next leap even hard. And
I think we're already probably seeing that to an extent, like you're saying. Just looking at pay-per-view numbers, you know what I mean? You wonder to what extent this is already in effect or it's starting. But I certainly agree with you 100%, because I think that you do look at, like you're right. There's so much nickel and diming now. The UFC has actually raised its price too over time. I just think that at some point, the model it just starts to seem old and outdated and unnecessary.
If you're not buying UFC on pay-per-view, what are you buying on pay-per-view? Like, I know you can buy WWE, but I know that if you are a network subscriber, all of them are behind that. Right?
True, it's true. Probably nothing like the big boxing event, but that would be the same thing.
Big
straight up,
who are the? Isn't WWE on pay-per-view sometimes?
Yeah, but again, with the network, you can just get it.
Right. That's true.
Dude, who are the sad old men buying pornography on cable?
That's great.
Can you imagine?
There's like 10 of those. Like you're flipping through, and you're like, dude, there's like 10 different channels. I'm like, is this still a business?
It's like how great are your sexy co-eds that I have to pay for that I can't find for free in Google Incognito? You just wonder. It's like. I really have thought this too. Like, when you get to behind the paywall, you saw this too. ESPN Plus added Serie A rights.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they added all the now 30.
Ronaldo winning, all of a sudden.
Dude, it changed overnight. So what they're going to do is it's going to be. I think it's like nearly 400 games. You can appreciate that Ronaldo went there and it changed the equation. They're going to put. It's like the UFC deal. 10% of the games are going to be in ESPN or ESPN Plus, and the rest of them are all going to go on. Excuse me. 10% are going to be in ESPN or ESPN2. The rest will go on ESPN Plus. But I'm just saying, like, these bundles inside the streaming services, they're starting to get better and better, so they get more interesting. Like, you got to have something.
Subscription-based things are the key. This whole pay $60 one-time thing.
It needs to be hot.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, next. Okay, Chuck, this will go to you. As MMA skill sets, I thought, when I first read this question, I thought, I don't know what to make of it. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought it was excellent.
Okay.
As MMA skill sets continue to evolve and look less and less like one specific discipline and more of a seamless mix of them, is judging only going to become more difficult and produce controversial decisions like DJ versus Henry more often? I think this is an excellent question. MMA judging has never been harder. And think about who did, God, I could see the fight in my head. It was on the Hamburg card. It was one between God, was it Danny Roberts and then the Belgian kid?
Oh, yeah. No, I don't think he was Belgian. He was from...
You know what I'm talking about, though, right?
I think he might have been Swedish. Yeah,
something like that.
Something comp or
something like that, yeah. So what ended up happening was these two guys went back. I mean, it was an excellent fight, but they were going back and forth. You couldn't tell where one guy's offense started and the next guy's defense began.
That
ended
up finish, right? Knockout?
I don't remember. No, I think this one went to a decision.
Oh, then we might be talking about...
Yeah.
Then I don't think it was Danny Roberts.
Whoever it was. You get the idea. In an era where you have a good striker versus a good grappler, it's much easier to tell who's winning and who's dominating and what makes sense. Even then it can get complicated. But when you have these guys who not only have the defense to negate each other, but they're relatively equal in skill level, and all of their games blend together, and you got to pick that apart, and you don't get instant replay. Do you think there's anything to that question? Because I didn't think of it. I'd always thought of it, well, as their defense got better. But it's more complicated than that, isn't it?
Yeah. I didn't really think of it, but yeah, 100% true. Because if you got a wrestler versus a striker, you know if the wrestler's trying to take him down and gets that takedown on top, you go, okay, that guy's doing what he wants. He's winning. And if the other guy's standing and, beating him up, okay, it makes sense. But nowadays, it's just a mix of everything. And, some guy makes a little stride here, but then the other guy does in another area.
But also, think about it. I mean, boxing is, it's a narrow enough universe to sort of gauge. Even then it can get difficult, obviously. But think about the big stick and ball sports. On the field, there's a defense and there's an offense, and football, they're separate teams.
True.
European people may not realize that. If you play for the defense, you might play for special teams, but you don't play for the offense.
Right.
Two different teams. If you play
the old days, you did. You played both.
Okay, but in baseball, one team is hitting, one team is not.
I hear you. Yeah.
In basketball, just depending on what side, yes, you can get a nice block, but you're on one side of the court. It's pretty clear. In MMA, it's like, wow, it's really hard.
Yeah, sometimes you might be on bottom, but man, you got the other guy working in with elbows.
It used to be our big confusion was if a guy was on bottom and the guy was on top, the guy on top was automatically given he must be winning. He must be winning the fight. Yeah. And you'd see guys sometimes dictating from the bottom. What was that? It was Miguel Torres and Demetrius Johnson back in the day. You remember that fight? It was always a big controversy.
And also Diego Sanchez-Cleguida was in the fight.
So you had these certain fights where there was, who's dictating the action here and who's doing the most, who's threatening the most. And it was, in these cases, it was the guy on the bottom. That used to be the scenario, and it still is. And I feel like to this day, there's still judges who don't see what's going on in that sort of situation. But you're absolutely right, man. In a single sequence, guys' defenses have sharpened up so much their defense into offensive transitioning and stuff like that, and scrambles and everything. It is increasingly difficult when the guys are all the parity of the league is that much where guys are just that skilled. I mean, I watch it with the naked eye. Some people are like, "Hey, man, what'd you score that for?" There's so many times I just want to be like, I'll always take a stab at what I think I saw, but there's so many times I'm like. Fuck if I know. I don't.
There's times we're around it. I'm like,
I see on Twitter people like it was obvious it was for that guy. I'm like, shut the fuck up. You don't know. None of us know.
The obvious thing sometimes on these, I'm like, what are you talking about? Obvious,
Yeah.
But
it's a good point. That's why I really believe it's not just good. Yes, you want to be well rounded, but having that real nasty specialization in MMA, the good ones all do it. And it does make judging, I think, in the end, great question, a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Do we have any more? We do, right? Yes. Here we go. Since you brought up the Poirier documentary last week, favorite MMA-related book or film? Who wants to go first?
It wasn't a book or film, but it was a TV show. That Kingdom show I thought was really good. Did you guys see that?
I interviewed the guy who was in it. What was his name? He was also in Captain America.
You talking about
something with John?
Are you talking about the coach?
I don't.
Grillo?
Frank Grillo, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I thought that they portrayed, obviously they have to add some drama around the circumstance, but he owns a gym, the Navy Street Gym, and, all the struggles that kind of you witness in the sport are very real in that sport. The way that they train and cut weight and everything is very realistic, and I thought the acting in that was really good. It was a good story, you know what I mean? I think it only ran for 3 seasons, but Jonathan Tucker, he's a big MMA guy, but I thought he was excellent in that. So I would say that that's the best thing I've seen, in that realm for MMA so far.
Yeah. I think my favorite documentary ever MMA related was Choke with Hicks and Gracie. Because, nowadays it's hard to get that type of access, the type of access they got into his family, backstage, it was pretty crazy. And it kind of opened up a window of who really Hicks and Gracie was. Yeah, I would say that's my favorite documentary, MMA.
As a general rule, I don't read MMA books or movies because they're...
was that movies or documentaries?
Either.
Okay.
I've not seen too many documentaries, I don't think. I've seen Choke, but so long ago I can't hardly remember it.
It's a great documentary.
The Poirier one, I saw that years ago as well. I can't remember all that much about it.
Smashing Machine, remember that one?
Smashing
Machine. Smashing Machine was an interesting one.
Yeah, that's kind of more in the old.
Yeah, especially as it related to PED use and everything else involved. So that was kind of interesting as well. So I've seen some of them, but if it's a major motion picture,
Yeah.
What was that movie that came out? I think it had Tom Hardy in it.
Oh, it was
never watched
Warrior. I know, and everyone was like, "Dude, Warrior's a good movie."
Yeah.
I'm like,
I was like, nah.
right. If you think
Red
mediocre
Belts.
movies are good movies, yeah, it's a good movie. But it's not a good movie because it's actually mediocre. Red Belt was like hard to watch. It was bad. And who was that written by? What's his name? David Mamet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like, we got an established playwright. I'm like, well, he dropped the fucking ball on that one. And all these books, it's like these autobiographies. It's like,
Generally, those are pretty bad.
I don't really care.
The ones I've read are pretty bad.
so I'll give a bit of a different. I'll go a different direction. Kerry Howley wrote a book.
Throne. I was just going to mention that.
I would say
one of the better ones.
I don't think it's. I actually thought the book was a little bit. People were like, throwing themselves on couches talking about, "Oh my God, this book is so good." I was like, "It's good.
100%.
It's good. It's not that good, but it's good. It's good. It's a good book." But I think one that our audience might like if you've never read it. Sam Sheridan has written 2 books, and the first one was it A Fighter's Heart or A Fighter's Mind? I can't remember which one.
I don't remember. Titles I'm pretty bad with, but
Yeah, it was the first
read it.
Sam Sheridan book, and there's a reason why it's important because a lot of people don't know the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil and how that closely associated with class, and how luta livre was for the poor people and Jiu-Jitsu was actually for the rich, the Jujubre boys and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot, and he goes into also dog fighting and chicken fighting and how these are bad worlds, but it's important to understand who the people are who are involved and what it all means, and how we even take in terms in MMA gameness, which is essentially defined as pursuit of the fight despite physical consequences. That comes from dog fighting. So it's a really, really good book. The second one I didn't like as much, but the first one I thought palatable to a wide audience, smart, informative, well written. Give that a look as well. So that's good. Anything else? Yes. I think this is the last one. Aaron Pico is getting a major step up in competition. He's fighting Leandro Higo, who, by the way, is a very good fighter for his next fight. Is this the right decision, or should MMA follow the boxing model of nurturing their stars along slowly? I don't know what you guys boys think. Here's my thing about this. It's like, I think that, yes, the boxing model probably is better. Aaron Pico does not have a lot of patience.
And Bellator can't win. It's like they normally do that model. They normally just keep feeding.
Ed Ruth has quietly been doing that.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So they normally follow that model anyway.
You just keep going. MVP, it's interesting. I don't know, but you just look at his last fight and he looks already so developed and he looks experienced when he fights that it's just like.
And you saw TJ Dillashaw was like, that dude is good.
Yeah.
So honestly, I'd even favor him in that fight. I'm not sure.
I tell you what, if he beats Leandro Higo, I know a lot of fans will know that name. Trust me when I tell you that boy can scrap.
I just think, man, when you got a guy who's like that, and I feel like they've done a great job of actually getting his name out there. Anybody who follows, follows combat sports in general knows who he is. You got to give him that kind of fight at some point, right now, because I feel like he's already at that intrigue level. People don't want to see him just smash guys they've never heard of. So you give him a guy like this, it's the perfect incremental boost up. As long as he pans out to be who he is, though, he's going to have to show himself. Even if he loses, he's going to have to show himself in the way we're all thinking of.
I'd personally like to see a little bit of a slower build because once you take this step, you can't go back.
Yeah, it's hard to go back.
Yeah, it's true. He already lost too. Let's not forget.
So once he beats someone like that, he can't just keep taking guys who we've never heard of. So I'd like for maybe that fight to be like two, three fights down the line. But I mean,
it'd be fun to see Ed Ruth, though, because I think that, he's a guy who's been fighting guys that, of course he's going to win that. Now he's in this tournament. That's what's so great about that, is you get a guy that you're like, we don't know his full
I think a lot of people are sleeping on him.
Yeah.
But he has just the kind of skill set to give a guy like Ruth problems, actually.
100%, man.
So that could be a lot of fun. Are we done on the tweets? Very, very quickly, let's go down the line. What's under the radar?
Well, I was going to mention my under the radar is just a guy who's always under the radar, and that's James Vick. He finally sits up on this podium with all these guys in main attractions. He's in his first major attraction. He's finally getting some spotlight, and I thought he handled himself really well. This fight's going to kind of sneak up because it's coming up on August 25th, I think, against Justin Gaethje. But, I mean, I think that this kid is just on the verge, really, of his talent finally marrying up to his personality and him becoming something more.
I'm going to go, I don't think we discussed it, but Dana White being open to the idea of signing Ben Askren. He brought that up. And
Really?
Yeah, he said he talked to Ben Askren. Yeah, he talked to Ben Askren, and he's like, Ben Askren is like, what are the chances I can get into the UFC? And he's like, yeah, let's talk. Let's talk, but you first have to become a free agent. But I mean, he's no longer dismissing him as, this guy needs more experience. So I don't know, maybe GSP Ben Askren, we see it one day.
That would be fun. So I'll connect one of my previous under the radars to this one with the. We'll see what happens with ACB, but with the problems that they're having, they have apparently let go of Gordon Ryan. Gordon Ryan is arguably the best American grappler, certainly inside the no-gi space he is. Inside the gi space he probably is not. But nevertheless, certainly one of the preeminent American talents. he is a free agent. But what's interesting about that as well is Eddie Cummings, as well as I believe another grappler, they have left the Danaher Death Squad. The Danaher Death Squad was a group that was really tightly knit. Gordon Ryan, Eddie Cummings, Gary Tonin, and many other ones. Those are the big ones, but there were many others. And Eddie had a split, and he took another guy with him, I think, or I don't know if they went to the same place, but
in New York,
his brother, probably.
I think they're still competing under the Henzo banner, but they're not directly affiliated with John Danaher. And I don't know what the reasons are. I have no clue. I just saw BJJ Scout did a little bit of work on that, so shouts to him as usual. Okay, that is it for us. We really appreciate you guys tuning in. Remember, always send those questions using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We'll try to get them in at the next episode. We will be back next week. Are you guys going to be here?
we'll be here.
Yeah, so we're going to be back next week. So that means you should be back next week. People always ask, are you guys on? It's like, I can tell you didn't watch the end of the show because we always answer that question. Nevertheless, we are back next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.